Good afternoon. My name is Kathy, and thanks for tuning in on NBC 11. Today is August 19th, 1930. It is 5 o'clock. What's the news today, Tanya?
The top news today is that the Great Depression is taking a major toll effect on families all across the nation. Women and children are trying to help their families survive by managing household budgets, canning, such as pickles, tomatoes, and some teas, and sewing clothes for their children.
Many stores and health clinics have closed all around the nation because of the Great Depression. Here's Tanya with a little girl named Susie.
What's wrong, Susie?
Well, my mama told me we don't have money for health care, so I can't get better. I have a bad case of the rickets, so that means my body can't handle the calcium. That means I'll have major bone problems when I grow up.
Got it. Okay.
Hello, and welcome to NBC 11 Breaking News. My name is Kelsey View, and I'm your Breaking News reporter. This just in. Teen dead from trying to escape the depression by jumping out of a train. It appears she missed the train and was run over. Penelope Flatt is on the scene now, and she will explain more. Over to you, Penelope.
Hi, this is Penelope Flatt here. As you can see, this young teen has been in a tragic accident. All she wanted to do was have a better life, but I guess there is no true way to escape the Great Depression.
Thanks for tuning in tonight on NBC 11. My name is Kelsey View.
And I'm Penelope Flatt, signing off.
Good night.
As you...
Today is August 11th, 1930. I can't do it! You're mumbling too.
Yeah.
I'm all night, I love to talk inside.
What's the news today, Catherine?
Oh my God!
You're mumbling too.
Thanks for tuning in tonight on NBC 11. I'm Kelsey View.
And I'm Penelope. What do we say?
Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for tuning in tonight on NBC 11. I'm Kelsey View.
And I'm Penelope.
Spectrum disorder as both a speech and language pathologist and an autism consultant for 30 years. She's presented at many state and national workshops and conferences, and she provides a lot of training and student support throughout the state. Susan presents on a wide variety of topics with a particular focus on the use of technology and evidence-based practices as positive behavioral intervention and supports for learners with autism spectrum disorder. It is with great pleasure that I introduce to you Ms. Susan Stokes.
Okay, wow, we did double in size, as Tammy said, once we got all the elementary folks in here. I'm very happy to be here this morning, and I'm very happy to be presenting to your entire school district. I always say that the more folks that understand these students, the biggest difference it's going to make in their lives. So I'm very happy I get 2 hours this morning to share information about ASD. As Tammy had said, I'm a speech language pathologist by trade, but I've been in the field of autism for 30 years. In my current position, I work as an educational autism consultant. So what that means is my everyday working life, if I'm not doing a training or one of these professional development institutes, I'm out in schools. And I'm providing support services to students who've been identified with autism spectrum disorder, but more importantly, I'm providing support services to you all, to the educational teams that support these students and the families as well. I always give my disclaimer when I do trainings. My everyday working life is autism, lots of experience, but I never ever feel like I'm an autism expert. In fact, there are times when I've had people introduce me, our autism expert is here today, and I'm always quick to correct and say I'm not an autism expert, I'm the autism support person or the autism consultant. And the reason being, I work with so many of these students every single day of my working life, and I want you to know I learn something from every single one of these students that I work with. And some of these students, they teach me an awful lot. So I never go into this thinking I'm the expert and I got all of the answers here. And the reason I share this, there may be days when you all are trying to figure out this kiddo so desperately. You might be beating your head against the wall trying to figure this student out. And there might be days I might be right there with you, or I beat my head trying to figure this student out. It's the whole reason the national symbol for autism is the puzzle piece. I mean, there could be no more appropriate symbol for autism than the puzzle piece. Because these students are puzzles, and some of them are very complicated, complex puzzles, absolutely. I've heard professionals say before, if you've worked with one student with ASD, you've worked with one student with ASD. And those of you that are nodding your head, you have worked with more than one. All right, you know exactly what I'm talking about here. So this morning, in the 2 hours that I have to share with you all, I'm going to give you, first of all, just a brief understanding of autism spectrum disorder, the unique way that these students learn, think, process, because that will absolutely impact how you instruct them, and it will also impact how you understand how they're presenting to you, and what might be some changes that you want to put in place that would be, as Tammy said, positive behavioral interventions and support. And at the very end, I'll share with you some techniques, some tips, some intervention strategies very specific to these students for programming. So I think handouts, they have like the ability to download electronic versions, right? So you all, if you brought it, great. If not, you've got an electronic version that should match up pretty well to my PowerPoint. So jumping into this. First thing, I feel like I say this almost every day when I'm out in schools or reminding folks of this. If you have a student in your classroom that's been identified with an autism spectrum disorder, first and foremost, you need to keep in mind this child has a neurological developmental disability, a brain-based developmental disability. Their brains are wired differently, and there is research to support this. Autism is a neurological processing disorder. How their brain processes social information, sensory information, communication can be very different than you or I or the other students in your classroom. Now, people tend to have no problem keeping this fact in mind when they have a student with autism that's identified with more so what I call the classic autism. That would be the student that might be not a real functional verbal communicator. They might engage in a lot more of the repetitive kinds of behaviors. People tend to get it right off the bat. Okay, this child, there's something a bit different, possibly something going on neurologically. But when you have a student in your class that is highly verbal, and could be highly intelligent. I mean, I have some students, their IQs are up in the 150 range. And they are using 20-word sentences and using vocabulary words. I don't even know what they're talking about. It's very easy to lose sight of this fact, that they still have a neurological, brain-based developmental disability that is going to impact them in a number of different ways that I will share with you in just a minute here. So keep this in mind, because if you have one of those verbal, cognitively intact students, oftentimes we get so hung up on the fact, well, they're smart, all right, so, if they're struggling, if they're having a meltdown because they missed one on a math test, it can't be autism because this student's really smart. He's just overreacting. All right, here, he's just doing this on purpose. He's smart enough, he should know better. IQ has nothing to do with your ability to process and understand, again, social information, sensory information, figurative language, abstract elements of language, of academics. And again, I'll talk more about that. So I just want to make that point real clear. Causation of autism spectrum disorder, this has been so argumentative in the world of autism for so many years now. What researchers do agree upon, it is a genetic-based developmental disability. Babies are not born without anything wrong, and then there's some kind of environmental insult that causes autism. We have finally linked the vaccination as a causation factor to rest. All right, so, and the reason we know there's this genetic piece is because they have discovered chromosomal abnormalities in varying combinations. So again, genetic, the underlying causation factor for autism spectrum disorder. If you have a student that's been identified with ASD, they will be impacted in 3 primary areas for sure, because these are the 3 diagnostic criteria. So they will definitely struggle in the area of social relations to some depth and degree. They will definitely struggle in the area of communication. And communication is just not, can you talk or can you not talk? Because I said before, I have many students that are highly, highly verbal, but they talk at me, not with me. All right, they engage in monologues, they're just kind of like verbally spewing all this information, but we're not engaged in a reciprocal back and forth conversation. So they struggle tremendously in this area of communication from a social communication perspective. And then the third primary area, we call it restrictive, repetitive, perseverative patterns of behavior. These are kiddos that can get stuck on things, have certain things that they absolutely love, have a difficult time shifting, might have a difficult time with change, like predictability. And I'll talk a bit more about these 3 areas, a bit more in depth a little bit later this morning. But what is important to keep in mind is that autism is now considered a spectrum disorder. It does look a lot different than it did before. When I got in the field 30 years ago, the students that I was working with 30 years ago that were identified as having autism, those were the students that were very socially withdrawn, I always heard the cliche, it's like they're in their own little world, engaged in a lot of repetitive kinds of behaviors, and they weren't very functional verbal communicators. I still work with those students, but I work with students that also look a lot different than that. So autism has changed greatly just in the 30 years that I've been in the field. And I think this slide definitely speaks to the continuum of what we can see in our students with ASD. Their IQ, their cognitive functioning. I have some students that are cognitively at a very young level. But again, I have some students that could be all the way up in that 150 range. And I've got everything in between. Regarding their social relation skills, I had just said primary area of difficulty. But how they present socially can vary greatly from student to student. I've had some students that are very socially withdrawn, very socially aloof, and those are the students that oftentimes people will describe, it's like they're in their own little world. I've had some students that have been so socially withdrawn, they don't even recognize people as people. People are more so like objects in their environment. I was in a classroom and I was sitting between 2 areas of this classroom, and the student with autism wanted to get to the other side, and they literally climbed over the top of me. I mean, like I was a piece of furniture in the classroom. It wasn't like they came over and kind of like, nudged me and kind of looked at me like, come on, person, get out of the way. I was truly a piece of furniture in that classroom. So on this end of, the social continuum, they might be way down here. But I also have students socially that have a strong desire to engage in social interactions, and they are like trying to jump into every social situation they can. Strong drive, strong desire, but they're having problems. They're struggling. Why? Because they have this desire, yet they don't have those skills to be successful in that social interaction. And again, despite having a high IQ or being highly verbal, all right, despite that. Communication, I have students that are not functional verbal communicators, and then I have the students that talk their arm and leg off. Motor skills, and I know my OTs, my PTs, and my Phy-Ed teachers can definitely speak to this, where they've seen with these students a broad continuum of how their motor skills can present. Some of these students, their gross motor skills, their fine motor skills, they might struggle. They might be motorically awkward. They might require occupational therapy or adaptive Phy-Ed. But some of these other students, this might be their strength area, where they can be incredibly agile in this motor area. And then the last area that I have listed up here, where we can see such a broad continuum, in the area of sensory processing. Our brains, all of us, 24/7, our brains are processing incoming sensory information from our 7 different sensory areas. You just don't have 5 people, you have 7. And our brains are trying to interpret it and figure out, do we need to respond to it, do we need to not, tell us what it is it too loud, is it too soft, etc. And for our students with ASD, because it is a neurological processing disorder, their brains typically struggle with processing this incoming sensory information accurately. So the brain can send out erroneous messages. So there might be a very soft humming sound. You guys can hear that right now? Some of you might. All right, this has been going on, people, while you've been in here. But your brain has been processing that, saying, oh, it's auditory stimulation. Your brain is saying, it's really soft, it's not painful, it's not a threat to your safety. And your brain is saying, it must be coming from some ventilation system. It's no big deal, don't pay attention to it. Now, you don't have to make a conscious effort to do that. Your brain is doing all of that for you. But with students with ASD, neurologically, their brains might interpret that number 1 as, oh my gosh, what is that? It's extremely loud. It's very painful. I think it's possibly a threat to your safety. You need to get out of here. All right, and I've had students that will take off running, all right, because of something like this. And it's not that they are being drama kings or queens or overreacting. It's the response neurologically that their brain is putting them into due to this sensory stimulation. The brain has misread this sensory stimulation. Does that make sense to everybody? So this is real. This is extremely real, people. So autism is what I call a spectrum disorder. It's not just the picture that everyone had from a few years ago of Rain Man, all right? It's like everybody thought Rain Man was autism. If you didn't fit the Rain Man profile, then this person must not have autism. I was doing a talk, and there were a lot of brand new teachers, we're talking 20s, low 20s, and I talked about Rain Man, and I saw so many blank faces. Man, I am so old. These 20-year-olds don't even know who Rain Man is. So let me show you real quick. 3 of my students, actually. 2 are identical twins. And the twins have classic autism, all right? They are not real functional verbal communicators. You're going to hear vocalizations from them. You're going to see some repetitive behaviors. And then the second clip is a young man who also has autism spectrum disorder, but presents very differently from these twins.
Uh-oh, you guys, Kyle's getting into the lunch with the spectrum.
You know you have Asperger's syndrome, right? Yeah. What does that mean to you?
Well, I just think you just have not really mental difference, but just kind of a different kind of person. Not exactly weird or strange. Just kind of a different kind of person.
Okay.
Thinkers or something.
That is a very cool way to look at it. What do you think is most important for teachers to know, about kids that have Asperger's syndrome?
Well, there's a lot of things we think is really important, but the homework. So we like they're kind of late. We like that they can be kind of laid back, not high stressful. Like they don't really push us really fast. That gets us kind of anxious.
Okay.
And I know with a lot of kids with autism, we like people with sense of humor. A lot of the teachers that I find hard have a sense of humor, so that's nice.
Okay, so when you look at this video clip of those 3 young men, you would probably think, oh gosh, those twins, they must, their autism is very apparent. They must really struggle the most. Because when you look at the second video clip of my friend, you'd be probably hard pressed on the surface, right, to pick out that there isn't anything going on with this student. His voice sounds very nice. You know, I mean, I have some verbal students that, you know, you pick up there's something a little different because they might talk like this. You don't hear like inflectional changes, kind of robotic. Alex doesn't speak like that. He's got the inflectional changes. He's funny, you know, he was making jokes in there. So on the surface, I'm sure you're thinking, well, his autism, he must just have a little bit of it, all right, just a little bit, because he looks so good. And this happens all the time. I'll tell you, the twins have actually not struggled near as much as what Alex has in school, because Alex was very misunderstood and misprogrammed for because he looks so good on the surface. So many of Alex's behaviors were misperceived as very purposeful. You know, he's doing this on purpose. We're going to put him on a point system, and he has to, you know, very compliance-based was his program. Not looking at the behaviors he's exhibiting are because he doesn't have skills in these areas. And if we don't teach him these skills, all right, he's going to continue to exhibit these behaviors. He struggled significantly with something called social cognition or perspective taking. And he would say the rudest, most disrespectful things. And it wasn't that he was purposely trying to be rude and disrespectful. He gets a thought, or he used to get a thought up here, and it would come right out of his mouth, all right? He wouldn't consider, how might this impact another person? What might they be thinking about me if I say, this is stupid, this is really dumb? And if I tell the teacher, this is the most boring thing I've ever had to do in my entire life. Why do we have to do this, all right? Teachers didn't take real kindly to those sorts of comments. So Alex would, of course, get 0, 0, 0, 0 on his point sheet. I mean, every day, 0 points, every day. But what they didn't take into consideration is that he has no clue about perspective taking, how his actions and behaviors make other people feel. He's not able to put himself in the shoes of someone else, understand other people think differently from him. And he needed to be taught those skills when he was calm, using a curriculum-based approach, just like he was taught to read. And he's a highly intelligent young man, very highly intelligent. So that's why it was so easy to misperceive, you know, his skill deficits. Another area that he struggled in tremendously was self-regulation. Alex has and still has a lot of anxiety. And his anxiety would build over the course of the school day until he would go into what I would call a meltdown mode. And his meltdowns could look like lots of different things. My fear, and my fear not only for him, but for many of my students that don't have self-regulation skills, that they're going to end up in jail. And I kid you not. I mean, that is my biggest fear. Because if they're 18 and they're engaging in property destruction or physical acts of aggression towards someone else, they're going to end up in jail, people. Before 18, they can get to the juvenile system, you know? So these students, many of them, do not know how to recognize those signs of anxiety that are building. And they have a great deal more anxiety than anyone else because of the neurological features and characteristics of autism. So many of these students need to be taught, again, when they're calm, self-regulation skills, how to bring themselves back down. So often, excuse me, we impose regulation upon them, but that's not self-regulation. Self is the key, and self is what's going to make them independent and successful long-term in life. And definitely keep in mind, IQ is not the best determiner of school ability and functioning. But I think so often we do get caught up on how smart somebody might be, and that's, you know, kind of, we put all of our weight on that, and we think, oh, you know, the struggles can't be, you know, related to autism because they're too smart, they should know better. And truly, for, I would say, many of these students, their autism spectrum disorder is a hidden disability. And I think absolutely Alex is testimony to that. Few miscellaneous stats. Autism spectrum disorder, spectrum, it occurs in 1 in 68 births now. This is the latest stat from the CDC. I can remember when I did trainings years ago, I can remember saying 1 in 10,000. I can then remember saying 1 in 5,000. I said 1 in 5,000 for a long time. Then we got down to 1 in 1,000, and we seem to be stuck there for a long time. As recently as like about a year and a half ago, it was 1 in 110, and now we're down to 1 in 68. Hold on to the thought that you're all having. Why is this happening? All right, what's going on? There is a higher incident rate in males than females, and I'm sure if I kind of like you even looked at the stats here, you know, in your school district, I bet there's a higher percentage of males versus females. And that kind of goes back to that genetic piece as well, all right? Oftentimes, the X chromosome is a chromosome that is involved, all right? And we know what makes a boy a boy, what makes a girl a girl, you know, with XX, XY. Autism spectrum disorder is considered right now the fastest growing developmental disability in the United States. Which brings us to the $64 million question. All right, why are we seeing so many more of these kiddos in school? Those of you that have been in schools for as long as I have, I'm sure you're thinking, okay, 30 years ago, like, I hardly ever had a student in my class with autism, especially you gen ed teachers. And now you're thinking, it's like every year I'm getting a student with autism. What is going on? There has to be something in the water, or there has to be something that's causing this increase that we're seeing, you know, especially again educationally, because it is impacting us very much so educationally. Well, I can tell you a couple of reasons why we're seeing this increase. The biggest reason of all is the labeling system for autism has changed in 30 years. It's changed both medically and educationally. When I got in the field 30 years ago, the medical criteria for autism was the people had to be very significantly, severely involved to receive that label of autism. All right, very severely, significantly involved. That was the criteria the medical folks had at that time. In the past 30 years, the medical folks have kind of watered down. I don't know if that's a politically correct term or not, but they have changed their criteria. All right, they've changed it to now encompass, you know, a broader spectrum of people. So, but 30 years ago, these kiddos that are highly verbal would not have been labeled as falling under the autism spectrum. But now they are, because that criteria has changed significantly. Educationally, we didn't even have a special education label for autism until like the mid-90s. These students were in our schools, teachers, we were just calling them something else, all right? Whether we were calling them CD, whether we were calling them EBD, you know, other health impaired, or, you know, just funny kid, you know, quirky, unusual kid, who knows? But they were in our schools. We didn't have a special ed label for autism, and we do nowadays, all right? And we have educational criteria that we look at to determine does the child meet the Wisconsin, you know, criteria for an impairment of autism. We have that just like for kiddos with learning disabilities, cognitive disabilities, speech and language, visual, etc. There is now one for autism. So that alone has greatly broadened the number of people that have now been identified with autism spectrum disorder. I think another contributing factor has been increased awareness to this particular developmental disability, more so than any other developmental disability. And I do think it started with Rain Man. I mean, it was kind of like when that movie came out, it was kind of like, wow, what is this thing called autism? You know, and everybody, I think they were just kind of like, this is amazing, you know, this autism. Since then, there is so much by the media on autism. It's like I can hardly open, you know, my homepage on my internet, CNN.com, without seeing autism somewhere. You know, something about autism. It's been the cover story of Time and Newsweek. I can't even tell you how many times in the last so many years. And TV shows are jumping on the autism bandwagon. You know, they all have characters nowadays that have autism. You don't see this with Down syndrome, all right? We're not seeing this with CP. It's like autism is the hot disability right now. So I think because of everyone's increased awareness and understanding, I think folks are being more readily identified with autism spectrum disorder. And I'm starting to wonder, is this pendulum, you know, starting to swing really far over? All right, you know, like the ADHD, remember a few years ago, like every single student, you know, with that pendulum, every single student had ADHD. Because I'm finding educationally now, because of educators' increased awareness and understanding, I'm getting so many referrals for students that are just shy, quiet kids, okay? And I'm like, can you not be shy and quiet anymore? Like, people automatically are thinking, oh, they must have autism because they only have 2 friends. I'm like, you can't just have 2 friends anymore, all right? So, you know, and autism is not being shy and quiet, all right? Autism is neurologically struggling in the area of social relations. And I'm going to define what I mean, all right, so that you have a better understanding, because I don't want you to think a shy, quiet student that mainly, you know, only has a couple of friends has autism. That is absolutely not the case. So that's, you know, these 2 factors alone I can definitely speak to as to why we are seeing so many more students identified with ASD in our schools. Is it treatable? I get asked this question all the time because people keep saying, well, you keep saying it's neurological, so is it kind of like it is what it is? You know, this is what we have. And I'm like, absolutely it's treatable. And as long as the educators, all of us educators understand how neurologically it impacts these students so that we can instruct them according to their very unique learning style. And secondly, give them instruction in the very unique learning need areas that they have. And I'm not talking academics, people, all right? I'm not saying they don't need academics, yes, but they also need instruction in, like I said with Alex, like social relations, self-regulation, communication, how to be a more flexible thinker. We're going to need to teach them those skills. So we can do some neurological rewiring as long as we're giving them that instruction. But if we don't give that instruction, they're not going to change, all right? This is going to remain the same. I've had people say, well, is it curable? Can you, like, you know, you're cured, you know, of your autism. Well, you know, I've said it's a neurological processing disorder, so they can certainly make lots of progress and be very, very, you know, productive, you know, citizens in society, but when I say they're cured, and I would say most professionals would say, no, it's not a curable developmental disability. How many of you have heard of Temple Grandin? All right, probably about half of you. If you've not heard of her, this is a person you are going to want to check out, people, let me tell you. She is, she has taught me so much about autism because she has autism. Temple is in her mid-60s now. She has her PhD in designing animal livestock holding facilities. It's like whoever thought you could go to college and specialize, you know, in that. But anyway, and she's a world authority in her field. I'm telling you, world authority in her field. Sought after tremendously for her skills in her job. She also travels around and speaks about what it's like to have autism. And I've heard her speak a number of times. In fact, she's going to be the keynote speaker in May at the Autism Society of Wisconsin State Conference. And every time I hear Temple speak, I learn more and more what it's like to have autism, which helps me understand my students so much more. She has written a number of books, resources. Some are like her life stories, some are a bit more technical. But let me tell you, if you get a hold of any of her resources, they are exceptional. Students to auditorily process, and our words disappear, right? Your words don't stay around in space, float around out there for all your students to look at, you know, and process. They've got to auditorily process that information that you're giving them quick. All right, and students with ASD, because it is a neurological processing disorder, they are going to be much weaker at processing this auditory information that you might be giving them because it's so transient, because it's here and gone. But if you give them static information through a visual channel, and I don't care whether it's a picture, you writing something out, a video, but they're seeing it and it's static, it's there as long as they need to process, you are going to see an increase in their ability to understand your expectations, understand your directives, understand assignments, and to learn skills as well. So keep that in mind. And this is very neurological, and it is absolutely across the autism spectrum. I don't want you all to think, well, this must not pertain to those highly verbal students because they can talk, all right? So surely I can talk right at them and they can understand me. No. That's 2 different things, people. How well you can talk has nothing to do with how well you process incoming information. So I don't want you to make the mistake and think that these highly verbal students, that this doesn't apply to them. It absolutely applies to them, where they still need the static information. And I also don't want you to think, if you're a middle school, high school student, or teacher, well, they don't need it in middle school, high school. You know, they can use all that visual stuff down in elementary, but now they're in middle school, high school, we don't use that as much. All right, nothing magically happens in the brains of these students during the summer between elementary and middle school, and their brains are totally rewired now, and they understand transient information just fine. All right, no. They still need visual information, all right, throughout high school and beyond. Their rote skills are a strength area. This is another unique learning, thinking, processing difference with students with ASD. So they'll learn rote information well, all right, very well. And that's why oftentimes academically, kindergarten, first grade, second grade are strong for these students academically because it is a lot of rote learning. But what happens into second grade and absolutely third grade and above, it's not, academics are not so rote anymore. We're wanting them to start utilizing critical thinking skills. All right, that stuff's not going to be, spelled out black and white. They're going to have to start pulling out the main idea, or making some inferences, or predicting, or problem solving, comparing, contrasting, synthesizing information. That's absolutely third grade and above people. And so many of my students that still might have an IQ can struggle academically with those abstract elements, all right, that again come about in third grade. So don't be fooled by their strengths and their rote skills, because again, that's a very surface level skill. Rote is surface. When you rotely learn something, memorize something, that's a surface level skill. It's not an in-depth understanding. Think about did you ever memorize something like for a test? I mean, I can remember doing this. Like, I memorize information, then as soon as I got my test, I'm like writing down everything that I memorized, so that I could like get it out of my brain, and then I could reference back. I mean, does anybody remember doing that? All right. Like a day or two later, though, did you remember a lot of that information? No, because you let it go. It was a surface level, rote memorization, not an in-depth processing. And that's the difference with these students. Something else I want to point out, because they are so good at rotely learning things, they will rotely learn whatever it is that we teach them to say. And oftentimes, we misinterpret what's coming out of their mouths because we've taught them to say it as meaning they have an underlying skill. And I see this all the time in the area of social relations, all the time. So I have a student that would go out on the playground and break every single playground rule, every single recess rule. So his teachers wrote like this little narrative about the rules for recess. They'd read it every day. I mean, it got to the point where he knew it verbatim, all right? So he would stand there and he'd spit out the rules for recess and then go right out onto the playground and he would break every rule. So the teachers and the administrators said to me, he knows what he's doing. He absolutely knows what he's doing because before he goes out there, he'll tell you what those rules are. And I said, but have you actually taught him the rules for recess, or have you just taught him what to say? Because there's a big difference here. These verbal kiddos will learn whatever it is you teach them to say, and they'll spit it right back at you. But you have no guarantee they have an underlying understanding. And I said, has anybody gone out on the playground when it's not recess and actually done some role playing, some modeling? Have we done any videos, all right, to teach him the rules for recess? Those are different strategies we might utilize to teach the skill, not just a rote recitation of those rules. So be real careful, because these verbal kids, they'll learn to say whatever it is you teach them to say. I'm sorry is another one. I have so many students that rotely learn I'm sorry, and I'm sorry. All they've learned is that when you exhibit this behavior, you follow it up with these two words, I'm sorry. So I had a student who was a hitter, and this student, before they'd even hit, they'd be like, I'm sorry, as they're practically hitting students, and it's kind of like, okay, this is a little weird. But a lot of people are like, well, he knows what he's doing because he's saying I'm sorry. I'm like, he's learned these words go with this action and behavior. I'm sorry. Truly, but if I'm using that and I know what I'm sorry means, it means I'm taking your perspective. I'm realizing how you're thinking and how you're feeling based on my actions and behaviors, and I feel really bad as a result. I feel very bad because of that. And I have so many students that struggle, but we make them say, I'm sorry, and I'm not saying we shouldn't teach them to say, I'm sorry. That's a very socially appropriate skill, but people don't stop there thinking because you've taught this student to say, I'm sorry, that they have this underlying perspective-taking skill. Unless you've taught it, they won't. And I've had students that are just rotely apologizing. I mean, I've had teachers say, I don't think he really means that. I'm like, oh, he doesn't. You know, he's just doing it because we told him to. All right, but we need to make sure that we teach that underlying perspective-taking piece. Does that make sense to you all? Very important to keep in mind. These students, their attending skills can be variable. They will attend to things, people. Don't think they're poor attenders. I've never met a student yet that does not attend well who has autism. But they attend to what's interesting, what's motivating, what makes sense to them. And no offense, it might not be you as the teacher at the front of the room instructing, all right? So I'm always like, what will they attend to? What's motivating? What's interesting? Can we somehow pull that in? A lot of times it's their high interest area. So Camden was one of my students that loved NASCAR. I mean, NASCAR was the end all. And if his teacher could bring NASCAR, his gen ed teacher, she learned a lot about NASCAR. And if she could bring it in any way, shape, or form, I'm telling you, his attention, his interest, his motivation increased significantly. One day I was in the classroom and she said, Camden, give me two-digit numbers. And he gave his usual response, no two-digit numbers. And she said, Jimmy Johnson plus Jeff Gordon. And he said 42 plus 24, and if you're not a NASCAR aficionado, those are the car numbers for those two drivers. You know, so I mean, and I'm looking at her, she said, I become seamless, you know, with using NASCAR. So again, how can you get them to attend? These students will be, regardless of what their IQ might be, they tend to process them in a very concrete, literal, black and white, rule-bound manner. All right, they struggle with more abstract thinking, symbolic relationships. There can be lots of communication breakdowns because of their very concrete thinking. Because our language is very figurative, we've got jokes, we have teasing, we have hidden meanings, and I have students that have so misinterpreted that. And again, regardless of what their IQ might be. And I've had, these students oftentimes will look very non-compliant. I had a teacher call me and say, you know, Ryan is the smartest student I've ever had, but he's also the most non-compliant student I have ever had. And she said he refuses to follow a lot of my directives. So I was in this classroom observing Ryan, and it was the end of the day, and the teacher gave the directive to the class, everyone go out, get your coats, backpacks, come back in, get ready, line up, time to go home. And Ryan's standing there, and she said, this is what I mean. She said, not only this, but there are multiple times a day, she said, where I give a directive and he refuses. Non-compliance, he's just standing there. So, you know, she went over and was trying to, you know, get him to move along. He's standing there, and I said, you know, I'll deal with it. So I went over, and I'm like, Ryan, what's going on? You know, I said, it's time to go home. And he looked at me, he said, but I'm not going home. He said, I'm going to daycare. So like in his mind, he's waiting for the daycare directive because she just gave the directive for those kids that are going home. In this teacher's mind, she's thinking, he's smart enough, he should know better. Home, I don't care where they're going. All right, grandma's, daycare, scouts, who cares? You know, I use home to mean a whole bunch of things. You know, and so I'm trying to explain to her, but he's a very concrete, literal thinker. I said, and I'm imagining his non-compliance is resulting from him taking your words for, you know, exactly how you're saying them. And she said, I think he's just playing me. She said, I think because he's so smart, he should know better. And I said, but he has autism. And she said, but none of these other kids struggle. I said, none of these other kids have autism and think in this very concrete, literal manner. Many of these students struggle with generalizing. Teachers, they will learn things in a very rote, discrete way, but then you change it up a little bit, and to them it's like this is a foreign concept. And again, what do we think? We're thinking it's non-compliance, all right? Because I know they have the skill. They might have learned that skill according to specifically how you taught them with whatever materials or prompts, but they don't have a generalized concept. So again, it can look like non-compliance. And so often I hear non-compliance as a tip of the iceberg descriptor for so many of the students that I work with. Tip of the iceberg descriptor, non-compliant. So really what I want you all to consider, if you have a student in your classroom that's looking extremely non-compliant, could it be any one of these things? The big one typically is non-comprehension, all right? If you are giving them information, directives, you want them to follow a task, you want them to answer a question, and you're giving it through transient information, meaning you're talking to them, all right, and they're just sitting there, all right, I would hope that you're considering that non-compliance. I'm wondering if it's truly non-comprehension, if they're not understanding, they're not processing auditorily this information that I'm giving. Maybe I need to give it in a visual manner. I hope many of you are thinking this way. You know, I always say, if you were in a foreign country where you did not speak the language and somebody's giving you a directive, would you be very compliant, people? No, you'd be totally non-compliant, all right? And if they're talking and they're, giving the line and they're going and they're getting louder and they're getting closer and they're talking more, is that going to increase your compliance in any way, shape, or form? No. Is it going to increase your anxiety? Yes, because you know these people want something from you, but you have no clue what it might be. Now, in this foreign country where you don't speak the language, if the person stopped talking and maybe they start drawing out little pictures, all right, might that lessen your anxiety and help you maybe understand more so what this person is wanting from you? Same exact thing with these students. And again, all across the autism spectrum. Let me real briefly talk about some social relations and then we'll move on a few other. Social relation differences. With these students, I'm not talking about manners, social niceties. All right, I'm talking about social relation skills that develop in all of us neurologically by osmosis. I'm not talking about things that your parents taught you, which is please and thank you and I'm sorry and all of that. These students will rotely learn manners and social niceties. All right, they'll learn whatever it is you teach them to say, but you need to also make sure you're teaching these underlying social relation differences that they have. Social awareness, social attention, newborn babies are born to attend more so to people than physical aspects of their environment. They've done research on newborn babies. They want to look at people, not physical objects. And I have so many students that neurologically they are not innately wired to be looking at the people in their environment. They'll come in to like your classroom and they'll be checking out every electrical socket, or maybe your lighting system, or tell you like your whole internet system, how it works. They're not looking around at their peers because that's not innate for them typically to attend to their peers. How do you and I learn? What guides and drives our behavior a lot of the time if we're not sure? The people around us, right? We're looking at everybody else to help us figure out what we need to do. But could you imagine if that were not an innate skill for you? You wouldn't be doing the same thing as everybody else. When you are unsure of what to do, or if you've missed something, I'm always looking what's everybody else doing right now, because that helps me figure out. And I'm telling you, in schools, this is not innate. You will give a directive. And it'll be amazing to you because like the whole class maybe will line up or the whole class will move over here. But that student with autism spectrum disorder, who's very smart, is the only one sitting at their desks. And you're thinking, how can they not figure this out? Everybody else is over here. They're sitting here and they're really smart. They just must be doing this on purpose. This relates so much to this social awareness, social attention. Same thing out of the playground. Bell rings, boom, everybody lines up on those imaginary lines, but the student with autism that's still in the swings. And you're thinking, he just wants to keep swinging. He's playing us here. That's a student that's not using their good social awareness, social attention, that it is innate in all the rest of us. All right, so they're not, wow, look, I see all of my classmates are over here. I need to be over here. Can they learn this skill? Yes, but you are going to have to teach them this, I'm telling you, through lots of repetition. How do you teach it? You don't keep repeating directives. You go over to them and you say, look around you. Where's everybody else right now? Where do you think you need to be? What book does everyone else have out? What book do you need to have out? Draw their attention to their peers over and over and over. It's a huge life skill. Reciprocity, social reciprocity. That's turn-taking, people. That's the foundation for this turn-taking, back and forth. And my students that are verbal and don't engage in conversational turn-taking, they struggle with understanding reciprocity. Students that blurt things out in your classrooms, all right? They're not understanding this concept of turn-taking because you say something and they think you're talking to them, not the fact there's 25 other students in here, so they're going to give you that answer. And these blurter-outers, what do we teach them? Raise your hand. Raise your hand so the teacher can call on you. Well, then they rotely think, if I raise my hand, it's going to be the magic wand and the teacher's going to call me, and then I can say it. But no, that's not really the case. We teach them to raise their hand, but what we fail to teach them, you might not get called on because you're raising your hand and so are these 20 other kids, and it might not be your turn. They might call on someone else. So I have students that we've taught raise their hand, they raise their hand, they don't get called on, so then they still either blurt out or they have a meltdown as a result. What do we need to teach them? Turn-taking. We need to work on those reciprocal skills. Social rules, codes of conduct. Every situation, people you enter, there are rules and codes of conduct that govern that situation. And people aren't teaching you this stuff, all right? You figure it out from being in previous similar situations, or you watch other people and help you figure out how do you need to act. These students will exhibit possibly unusual social behaviors. I had a high school teacher. She said one of her male colleagues came up to her and said, you need to explain to Jonathan the social rules, or forget how he worded, but the codes of conduct for the men's bath restroom. And she's kind of like, well, what are they? She's like, why? What's going on? And he said, well, like where he stands, and eye gaze, and she's like thinking, okay, these are not things in the women's restroom we have to worry about at all. And she's like, can't you do it? And he said, well, I don't have him. I wouldn't feel comfortable. He's your student. And she's like, great. So, she said, she's thinking, how am I going to bring this up? Jonathan, gen ed student, average intelligence, but he has autism spectrum disorder. So she said one day she's with Jonathan, working with him one-on-one, opportunity kind of presented itself, so she kind of laid out these rules that this male colleague of hers had told her about. And she said afterwards, Jonathan looked at her and he said, oh, okay, thank you. And I find so often with these students, they don't know what those social rules are, these codes of conduct. But if you teach them, they're going to appreciate it because they're not learning it by watching their peers, people, and realizing, oh, when you're in the men's bathroom, and there's one person in here, you don't stand right next to that person. There's plenty of space you can leave in between. I don't know this personally. This is what people have told me. But anyway, they're not going to learn this by watching other people. All right, because of that poor social awareness, social attention. So let me move on that. Social play. Initiating, joining into a social situation. I have so many students that want to join in, but they don't know how to join in. So they join in by wreaking havoc, so they recess. They might go out, grab the soccer ball, take off running, just go in and maybe start getting physical with other students because they want to join in, but they're not sure how. We're going to need to give them that instruction. And then the greatest area of difficulty for these verbal, cognitively intact students that are, again, the most misunderstood and misprogrammed for, it's that social cognition that I was talking about, that perspective taking, being able to put themselves in someone else's shoes and understand how that person might feel. Understanding people think differently than they do. People might think about them based on their actions and behaviors. Or I might make a person feel a certain way based on my actions and behaviors. Every social interaction you engage in, you're using those perspective-taking skills. So with these students, you see a lot of what I call honesty out of the mouth of babes, meaning they get a thought up here and they are letting it right out. You and I have a filter system. We get tons of thoughts up here that we never let out of our mouths, all right? All right, because we know how it might impact someone else. I mean, I can't tell you how often we use that filter system, all right? These students, so they can alienate themselves from their own peers because they're saying it like it is, all right? One of my 5th grade students, he kept saying, Lori, you're getting fat. You are getting so fat, Lori. And 5th grade girls develop, differently than boys. Of course, Lori'd be upset. Michael's teacher would pull Michael in the hallway. You are upsetting Lori. You keep saying she's getting fat. And Michael would look at his teacher and say, but she is getting fat. You know, kind of like, are you missing this point? You know, and the teacher would be like, you know, like, are you missing the point, Michael? Michael was like speaking the facts, Jack, you know, and so, you know, he didn't get it. And Michael's teacher didn't get how Michael couldn't get it. And so finally Michael's teacher was like sick of talking about it with him because this had gone on and on. And finally Michael's teacher said, okay, Michael, we've talked about this so much. He goes, are you going to ever say this again to Lori? And Michael was very honest and said, well, I don't know. He said, it depends on how I feel or what I'm thinking. And I thought, honesty out of the mouths of babes, all right? Any other student would have told this teacher what this teacher wanted to hear. Nope, not going to say it again, regardless if they're going to walk right back to the classroom and do it, all right? But no, mine was like, might say it again, buddy, you know, I can't say that I'm not, you know, because I might look at her tomorrow and think, she is getting fatter, you know, so I got to be the one, you know, the town crier to let her know this. And it's not just their peers, they'll tell you. One of my high school teachers said that a student came up to her and said, that dress looks just like a bathrobe. He goes, why are you wearing your bathrobe to school? You know, so she said she's looking at her dress thinking, okay, does everybody else think this too? I'm like, nobody else is saying this because they don't want to hurt my feelings, but here's Mr. Honesty, you know, saying this. So they can appear rude, disrespectful. That can be tip of the iceberg. They might interrupt, blurt out, all right? Because they're not realizing you're not just talking to them, you're talking to 30 kids in your classroom. They can struggle with competition. I have students all age levels that can get very upset if they don't win, if they're not first, if their team doesn't win. Major meltdowns. And this relates to this perspective taking. They're going into this competitive activity from their perspective, which is, I want to win. And they're not realizing everybody else out there is thinking differently. Everybody else out there is thinking they want to win. And when they don't win, they're not able to utilize perspective-taking skills like we do. All right, when I don't win or my team doesn't win, I can say, well, that other team played a lot better than me today, or maybe it was their turn, you know, to get picked or to win. No, I mean, they are not able to utilize those skills. And this is neurological, people. It sounds like extreme egocentrical thinking. It is. But it's not that they're choosing to think this way. This is neurological. They can learn skills in this area, but they're going to need direct instruction like we taught them to read. Cooperative learning groups, partner activities can be an absolute nightmare for a student that has perspective-taking difficulties. Can you imagine? Putting them in a group with 4 other students to figure something out in a cooperative, collaborative manner. No, it's going to be this kid's way or the highway, all right? And they're going to get upset when these other kiddos' highways do not match up with theirs. And I've had students, I mean, it's like heightened anxiety because it's like, why are these kids wanting to do it a different way? And the other students are like, we don't want to partner up with Billy because it's always Billy's way. And it's like no fun being with Billy at all. So the cooperative learning, partner activities, and then lastly under here, asking for help, seeking assistance. So many of my students need help, but they're not letting you know this in an appropriate way. All right, they might be like, getting mad, scribbling on their worksheet, walking around the room, grumbling, mumbling. Why? Because they know they need help and they're thinking, you should know it. At the same time, they know it because your mind matches up. Like you don't think any differently than they do, remember? So they're thinking you should be like running over. All right, one of my high school students would get so upset because nobody was like running and giving them the help. And I said, well, how are they going to know this? He said, well, they should know I need help. I'm just sitting there doing nothing. And I'm like, they're not reading your mind. You know, but that is truly what he was thinking. All right, because he thought, you know, they think the same way that he does. Lots of tip of the iceberg behaviors, people, relating to this one particular area. And again, not purposeful, not intentional, not volitional. It's because they don't have these skills. I talked about the communication. Of course, they're going to have receptive communication difficulties if you were doing a lot of talking to them, requiring auditory processing, and expressive communication. Even my highly verbal students, when they are anxious, they are not good communicators appropriately. We will see it behaviorally. The sensory processing, I briefly talked about this when I was talking about the continuum, but no, there can be tip of the iceberg behaviors and how these students' brains might be interpreting this incoming sensory input. I had a student, excuse me, that went home and told his parents that his teacher was hitting him. And he said, and she hit several times a day. And again, the parents are not believing this, but they're not thinking this child's making up a lie. And a lot of times we think these kids tell the biggest, whoppingest lies. And it's not lies, it's their perceptions of things are so different. Because why? Because their brains have perceived things so differently. So the parents knew this child wasn't lying, but they also knew that this teacher was not hitting him multiple times a day. And of course the teacher was like very offended that why would he say this about her. And I always say, don't take this personal. They're not trying to make this personal, let me tell you. So I went into the classroom, and this was a very nice teacher. And when the students were doing their independent work, she's walking around the room, monitoring the class, and she gives these nice little pats on the back to students as she's walking around. He's very tactily touch sensitive. So his brain does not perceive this nice little pat as a nice little pat. It's like physically painful. And to him, it feels as painful as somebody hitting him. And so that's how he was perceiving that. And again, he was not trying to get her in trouble. He was not making this up. It's how his brain neurologically was processing this sensory input. Rigid, inflexible thinking, restricted patterns of behavior. Tip of the iceberg behaviors that you'll see, many of these students have high interests, passions. Some people call them obsessions, but it's not like OCD. It's stuff they love, people. And like 24/7, they want to talk about it, they want to engage in this. All right, it's intense focus on topics, themes, objects. And what differentiates their high interests and passions from anyone else's? It's all consuming, all right? It's like you know it. Yeah, you will know it if you have a student that has this, because they're talking about it all the time. They want to draw pictures about it. They want to write in their journal. They want to check out books about it. They want to go on the iPad and look this stuff up. It's like all the time. So with these students, I'm telling you, you're not going to be able to extinguish these high interests that they have because it's strong, this neurological drive, and something else will pop up in its place. Be careful what you wish for, all right? Because there are some god-awful high interests out there, let me tell you, that we've had to work hard to reshape and redirect. I always tell teachers, take that high interest and can you use it, all right? Just like Camden's NASCAR, his teacher put NASCAR into any little thing and everything. So think about what they love and think, how can I use it? Don't become consumed with extinguishing it, because you're not going to. Strong neurological drive. And if 8 o'clock in the morning they come in talking about dinosaurs, and you say, when you go home at 3:30, you can talk about those dinosaurs, but we're not going to talk about it, they are going to talk about it all doggone day, people. And we use some things like visual schedules, where we schedule in time for them to engage in their high interest, because that's teaching them how to manage their high interest throughout their day. You can't do it all day, but we are going to give you a couple of times throughout the day. That's way better than just saying, not going to talk about it. Nope, when you go home, you can talk about it. They will keep talking about it over and over. Another tip of the iceberg behavior that relates to these neurological features and characteristics is that difficulty with change. All right, they like things to be predictable, as do most of us. They like things to be the same, preference for sameness, preference for routine. So early release days, or late start days, or substitute teacher days, or, oh my gosh, indoor recess days can throw many of these students. Changing your desks around, all right, if the student isn't there. I have students that they come in and they get really upset because now it's kind of like, this is just not making sense to me. This is a fine motor problem. And the OTs will test them and say, their fine motor skills are actually quite good. And you're like, how can that be? He's breaking his pencil, he's warping it, he's like, scribbling it. It comes to what it really boils down to is this neurological feature and characteristic where they are so focused on that letter formation and how perfect is that, and it's never going to be perfect enough in their mind, all right, that they're not able to express their thoughts. They're focused on that piece. And so when I have students, if that's what's going on, I'm like, take away the stress for writing, people. Give them access to different modes of technology so they can show us what they know. Take away that stressor right there. And many of these students do have a fear of failure. My smartest students have fear of failure. And this is where teachers are like, oh, come on, he can do grade level work, 3 grade levels above this, but now he's refusing to do math at his grade level, but I know he can do it 3 grade levels above. So he's just, he's just choosing not to do his work. He's being non-compliant. I have students that get so fearful they're going to make a mistake, they shut down. Why? Because that's the easiest way to avoid failing, right? You don't do it, you do not have to worry about failing. And with those students, we have to back way up and make their work absolutely fail-proof, and then gradually start building that difficulty from there. Because if I don't go back to that level and start building up, they're going to continue to sit there and do nothing. Addressing behaviors, PBIS. Are you guys a PBIS district, or are you guys familiar? Okay. So you guys, this is not new stuff. So many districts are using PBIS now. In the field of autism, we've been doing this forever because we've learned that if you truly want to change a behavior, you have to prevent it from occurring. All right, the proactive, positive behavioral interventions and supports prevent behaviors from occurring, and that's what changes it. Reactive manages that behavior for the moment. And by reactive, I mean the behavior happens and we react to it. All right, so back with Nick, he would run away at recess when it was time to line up, so the reaction was going to be he was going to miss the next recess. All right, so he wasn't going to run away if he was missing recess, all right, but the next time he went out on the playground, correct, he was going to run away. So it was managing it for the moment, but it was not going to change. With Corbin, getting that bus suspension, well, he wasn't going to be walking slow in front of the bus because he wasn't going to be riding the bus, but the next time he rode the bus, that behavior was going to come back again. And with our students with ASD, PBIS is very important. And I have a list here of a number of positive behavioral interventions and supports that I am always looking at, making sure that we have in place for our students with ASD. And these are something for you all as educational teams to consider. Do we have visual supports in place so that they understand us? There are simple changes you can make in an environment so that they more readily understand the hallway, where they're supposed to stand, where their locker or where their cubby is, in the classroom, in the gym. We can make very simple environmental accommodations. Are they exhibiting tip of the iceberg behaviors? Because they're trying to tell us something, and they're doing it behaviorally, so we need to teach them a more appropriate way to do that. Are they exhibiting tip of the iceberg behavior because they have sensory processing differences? Can we make some accommodations for that? Do we need to teach them self-regulation skills like Alex? And absolutely that direct social skills instruction. So these are all things that I'm looking at for my students to make sure, are we covering our bases here? Do we have these things in place to prevent behaviors from occurring? And I'll tell you, the reason why consequences are not that effective for students with ASD is very neurological. Because neurologically, they do not draw relationships very well between events, between actions and behaviors. All right, it's not like they connect the dots real well. And when we give a student a consequence to a behavior, we are assuming they're making that connection. Why? Because the next time they're going to engage in that behavior, we're hoping they stop and not engage in that behavior and remember, remember last time when you did this, they made you miss recess, or they gave you a detention, or you got a suspension, and so I'm not, then the child would think, or the student, I'm not going to engage in that behavior. They're able to draw that relationship, and I'm telling you, neurologically, these students don't, and this is all age levels. One of my high school students, Troy, cognitively intact, he's in gen ed classrooms, highly verbal. He had a big problem in gym class when he did not win, or his team didn't win. And again, it related to that social cognition. And Troy would start swearing, he'd start throwing materials, and if he didn't settle down, they'd send him down to the office. If he didn't settle down in the office and he continued, to escalate, they'd sometimes send him home. It's like an out-of-school suspension for the day. Here's what would happen when Troy would go home. He would call the school 25 to 30 times over the course of the rest of that school day. And he would say, okay, I want to clarify this. I do get to come to school tomorrow, correct? But I do not get to come to school anymore the rest of this day. So, the principal's telling me this, and he's like, we had to ixnay this. And I'm like, yeah, because it wasn't working. And the principal said, well, yeah, I guess so. He said, but more importantly, I was losing money. And I'm like looking at the principal, and he said, I was money factoring into this. He said, none of my secretaries were getting an ounce of work done. He said, because they're taking Troy's calls all day. And he said, so it's disrupting, any work that anybody's able to do. And I'm thinking, okay, and are you all not making the connection? He is not making the connection between his behaviors and then subsequently being sent home. How did we fix that? We started giving him direct instruction when he was calm through a curriculum to teach him those social cognition perspective taking skills. And I knew it was not going to be a quick fix. It wasn't like me writing a little story. Here, read this story and you're going to get it. No, it was like instruction, weekly instruction, multiple times a week. And I told the Fayette teacher, in the meantime, put Troy in a neutral role. I don't want to pull him out of your class, but if there's a competitive activity, let him be the scorekeeper, the timekeeper, or what Troy really loved to be, the referee, all right? I said, so he's not in the head-to-head competition because he can't handle it. He does not have the social skills to handle it. And so the next school year, Troy had learned some social cognition perspective taking skills and was better equipped at handling competitive activities. But it took a long time, people. Don't want you to think this is a quick fix. And also, going back to that foreign country that you all are in where you don't speak the language, all right, and should you be punished, though, for not following the directives that people are telling you to do in that language that you don't speak? I mean, would you think that's fair if somebody's punishing you? No. But I find so often with my students with ASD, they are getting punished for skills that we have failed to teach them. And we don't do that with our students academically. If a student can't read, we don't say, you're getting detention because you cannot read, all right? No, we teach them to read. But I find many of my students struggle with social relation skills, self-regulation skills, perspective-taking skills, even basic communication skills, and we're punishing them because they're exhibiting these behaviors that relate to these skill deficits that they have. So it's so important to consider those tip of the iceberg behaviors, where they're coming from, and what do we need to teach them. That's fair. This is not fair. So, this is like a favorite quote that I love, and I said it before. If you keep doing the same thing and the behavior does not change, absolutely, who is the slow learner there? And I'm telling you, it's not the child. So we need to reframe our thinking. Prevention is key. Removing them is not going to solve your problems, people. You're just managing it for the moment. Velcroing an adult is not going to be the magic wand answer either. I see that. Okay, we're going to just give them more adult support. Well, that adult support that's now Velcro to them does not have these magic powers, all right, all of a sudden to make this stuff disappear. They can certainly start teaching the child some of the skills and using some of those PBIS. That would be an appropriate use, but just simply Velcroing a person isn't going to fix it, and absolutely punishing them is not the answer. You do have to front load, and this is where teachers say to me, we don't have time. I'm like, I get it. Nobody's got time. But if as a team, you put the time into front loading, putting these PBIS strategies in place, it's going to save you time in the long run. I can guarantee this, because you spend a lot of time, people, with these students reacting and dealing with the aftermath. I've had students, it wipes out the whole rest of the day for everybody, all right? And I'm thinking, my gosh, if we could have put some time into putting this strategy in place and teaching them how to use this, we wouldn't have the whole afternoon now, wiped out as a result. Set them up for success and teach them skills. And always keep in mind, and this is hard for some folks to understand, but inconsistency is the most consistent characteristic of autism spectrum disorder. You're going to see inconsistency in your students' performance. I don't care how verbal they are, how intelligent they are. And the reason for this is because autism is a neurological processing disorder. And how well they can process at any given time can vary greatly. But I don't want you to think because their performance was really good at this given time, and now the next time it's not very good, people automatically jump to the conclusion of, well, I know they can do this. Because yesterday, they came in the school building and had no problem getting right down to their locker. Nobody had to hardly give them any support. They went right into math class, sat down, did 25 math problems. So you know what? We know they can do this. We know. Today they come in here and now they're just choosing not to. We had to give them so much support to get them from the door of the school to their locker, and then it was a big deal just getting them in math, and my gosh, we were lucky to get 5 math problems done. And this is where people say, so today they're playing us. You know, they are just playing us big time because we know what they have the ability to do. What you have to understand is these students are constantly balancing a tray. And there is all different size glasses of water on that tray at any given time. So maybe yesterday though, when they came to school, when they woke up in the morning, their favorite t-shirt that they wear every day was there, ready to roll. They could put it on. That did not add much to their tray because their favorite t-shirt was there. They were able to eat what they ate for breakfast every day. The bus driver took the right route to school. So that when they came to school that morning, there wasn't a lot on their tray that they were balancing. So they were able to neurologically process a lot better. They could handle coming in with 150 other students and get right to their locker. They could easily handle getting into that math class, and they could handle that 25 math problems. Today they come in, all right, and maybe that favorite t-shirt, mom has it in the wash, and maybe their cereal, their brother finished it all, and that bus driver took a different route to school. So they're coming in your doors, and you don't even know what all is already loaded up on that tray. So walking down that hallway with 150 other kids, oh my gosh, that is going to add, that might even dump that tray, as a matter of fact. So that's what I mean, and this can be throughout their day. But if you put in place those PBIS strategies that I had listed there, you have those in place as preventive, proactive strategies, you're going to be clearing the tray for these students. That's what keeps their tray cleared. But you will see this inconsistency. Therefore, our consistency is critical. Because if we're inconsistent, that's going to confuse them even more. And I've seen this where some people, we put in place some of those PBIS strategies, but they're not used consistently. Some people use them, some people don't. People pick and choose. What days are we going to use this? What days are we not? How confusing must that be for these students? Not knowing, is this person going to use this or not? Or today, do I get this? I have some students where we put in a basic visual support like a schedule. But the schedule is not available to them every day. And I said, well, why not? Well, because we figured we're having a good day today. We don't think they need it. People, would you want somebody to make that decision for you every morning? Like, do you want your spouse to say, you look like you're having a good day today? You don't need your schedule because you look like you're having a really good day. All right, that would be, this is my visual support, is my smartphone. I've got to-do lists. Everything's on here. But my husband does not make the decision for me based on how good of a day I'm having, whether or not I get my visual support. I get this every darn day, people, every day. And I do well because I have my calendar, my planner, my to-do lists. But this happens oftentimes with these students where these adults are making these decisions. Consistency is critical. You guys, last 10, 15 minutes here, it's a few general tips, all right? Number one, use visual information to communicate to them, all right? Constantly be thinking, how can I incorporate visual? Because it's static. It's there as long as they need to process. How can I incorporate visual information? So when I put visual information into the environment for students or give it to them specifically, it can look like a lot of different things. It might be as simple as taping a square off in the hallway to define their cubby area. Because I have students, this time of year in the winter with all that winter outerwear, they're out in the hallway and they're like running up and down the hallway. And we want them to stay like right in front of their locker, to get on their stuff. Well, that hallway's been one big wide open area. So maybe if we taped off a boundary and that they know this is where they put all this stuff on or where they take it all off, it keeps them better contained in this big, wide open area. And I use this colored floor tape. Phi-Ed teachers have this by the boatload, all different widths, all different colors. It's great because it doesn't peel off the floor when you peel it off. So this student's scooting their chair all over the classroom, all right? We just taped off a boundary for their chair. I had another student that was constantly up wandering around the classroom all the time while the teacher was instructing. And it was very distracting to the teacher and to the other students. So we took this tape and taped off an area around his desk and chair, and we said, you can stand up and move, but you gotta stay, within your boundary. Greatly reduced his, out of seat behaviors. This teacher would do a small group on the floor in her classroom, and it took another adult to keep the student with autism and some of the other students like corralled, because they'd like wander off. Again, she just took that tape and taped off an area, and it defined, this is where I need to be. And a lot of times people think this tape is, like people think, how is that going to work? Because they can like step right over that tape. That's true, they can, because it's not a force shield. It's not like they hit the tape and they bounce back. But I'm telling you people, and I've heard this with all students, I only work with students with ASD, but I know you all work with all different kinds of students. I've heard this works for all students. You give them, you set up boundaries, you define areas using this tape, and the students are like, okay, I'm not supposed to go beyond this. I've had teachers that have used it to segment off their desk area, all right? So don't think this is kind of like a silly idea, because I've seen it work time and again. Where to line up? I have so many students, really verbal students, that get in lots of trouble with lining up. And I'll tell you, one of the biggest reasons why it relates so much to their autism, every time we have students line up, it's unpredictable where they're going to be in that line. All right, unless they're line leader, or we have assigned places in line, which very few teachers have, the whole line has an assigned, we're just like line up. I have students that have heightened anxiety with lining up because they're always going to be in a different spot. So I have students that are in and out of line, they're shoving kids, they're all over, they're getting in trouble, and I'm like, the easiest solution to this is, first of all, assign them a place in line. And you don't have to give them a visual if they understand the ordinal concept of, you're just going to be second in line, all right? Or they can count off and be second in line. One of my teachers had a brilliant idea where she just took a box, put like numbers 1 through 10 in the box, and the student, first thing Monday morning, pulls out a number. And if he pulls out a number 7, he's going to be 7th in line that entire week for lining up. Anytime, going to gym, coming in from recess. And it has greatly reduced his behaviors. He counts off 7 and gets right where he needs to be. And the nice thing is she's working on flexibility, because next Monday he's going to pull out another number. He's going to be a different place in line. Some of my students, though, cognitively aren't going to understand that. So we might need to give them a visual to denote, here's where you need to be to line up, all right? For this student, a square worked really good. His teacher initially had an X. The X didn't work so well. Why? He had difficulty staying on top of a visual. He needed to stay within a boundary. So she just made a simple change, and he'd stay right inside that. So again, lining up is a big one. I would say most of my students have individual schedules, not just the schedule that's on the wall that a lot of elementary teachers have, their own schedule that reflects their information, whether they have speech, whether they have OT, self-regulation breaks. This is where we manage their high interest. We put it right into their schedule. All of that stuff is not on the teacher schedule. And secondly, I want my students interacting with their schedule. Immediately upon conclusion of an activity, they're checking it off, moving it to an all done, because that's what shifts their attention. I have finished this, and what's coming up next? And this is just an example. Schedules can look like anything. My favorite is the lower left. This was a girl who hated her schedule. It was just like a written schedule. She hated it, but she needed a schedule. So the teacher incorporated it into a high interest. This little girl loved clothes and purses, so the teacher bought a purse like at Goodwill, and she and Addie decorated it. And then Addie's schedule is Velcroed on the outside of this purse. This purse now goes everywhere with Addie. I mean, it's out. She puts it across her snowsuit. When she's all done, she pulls off that whatever scheduled activity, lifts up the purse, slam dunks it inside. All right, so they can look like lots of different things. This teacher had the brilliant idea of taking paint stirrer sticks and putting schedules, her students' schedules on there. The students, when they were all done with an activity, would just flip it to, the all done to the back side. This is just an example of a written schedule, and they incorporated with this student's schedule also where he could write down homework assignments, because that planner, that little box, was just too small, and that was causing so much stress. So his schedule was just built right into where he had a bigger space to copy down if there was an assignment. This is an example of structuring up unstructured time. This student, there were 5 minutes between the end of math and lunch. And so you guys know what that's like. Everybody's bustling around, putting things away, washing hands, getting their lunch cards, whatever. And this student, he would escalate. He'd start like running around the classroom, laughing hysterically, and it was very disruptive. So what we realized, this downtime, this unstructured time was very unpredictable for him. So we gave him a visual checklist. And this brought him right down to what exactly he needed to do during that unstructured time. Those of you that have to wear or that put like your ID on a lanyard or keys or whatever, add visuals onto there. Things that you feel like you're saying all the time, make a visual to reflect that so that you can reduce your talking or support your talking with a visual. First, then, is a visual strategy I use all the time with my students, all age levels. Sometimes I use it to teach them what a schedule is all about, and more often I use it in addition to their schedule. Because sometimes my students get so focused on something that I need to get them to focus on, okay, yeah, that's going to happen, but first we need to do this. So like in this example, Griffin had a written schedule. And after journal, he always got a break, always, because journal was so stressful for him. But on this day, he's like just I need a break. You know, and the teacher kept saying, well, you're going to get one, you know, after journal. See, it's right here on your schedule. At that point, his written list schedule was like, you know, too much. So like I just took a piece of paper and real quick I wrote first journal, then break. It's like I broke it down into these two simple components. I gave it to Griffin and I said to the teacher, let's back away. Because she was in a big power struggle with him. They were going round and round. And I'm telling you, you will never, ever win a power struggle with one of these rigid, inflexible thinkers. They are neurologically wired to be rigid and flexible. We're not. So I said, walk away. He's got a visual now. Griffin started working on his journal. Halfway through, he stopped. I came over and tapped it just to draw his attention back to it. But I didn't say, get back on your journal, all right? I didn't say a word. I just drew his attention to the visual, and I kept on moving. He finished journal, and he moved on to his break. When you put in place these visual supports, it will pull you out of a power struggle, all right? And that's the best thing about these visuals, because you're not going to win power struggles. The visual support does not allow them to engage in a power struggle because the piece of paper does not argue back with them, okay, like we do, all right? So it's hard to argue with a visual support. I use the first then also to break down scheduled activities. So maybe it says math on their schedule, but I have students that are like, you know, they're thinking math is going to last forever, there's no end in sight. So maybe we take a first then to break down math. And it could be like, I might have 3 things under there. It might be math, you know, we're going to do this, then we're going to do math flashcards, then we're going to do a math game. Then they get the iPad. And I have some students, I might even break down this even further. It might be math, page 62, 1 to 5, then get a drink. And then I reload it. Math, page 62, problems 6 through 10. Then, you know, take a walk, whatever. But I might have to break it down even more so, a scheduled activity. But again, the examples that I'm showing you are visual. We're not doing this auditorily, we're doing this visually. Those students that will not let go of something, they are talking, and you keep saying, we'll talk about this later, give them a visual. This is a 2-sided little stop sign that I have teachers give my elementary students that say, stop, you know, talk about this later, and then let them know when they can talk about it. And if it's, you know, 9 o'clock in the morning, don't make it 3:30 in the afternoon, or make it reasonable. And middle school, high school teachers, I've seen so many of my verbal middle school, high school students monopolize entire classes because they can't stop talking about something. And the middle school, high school teacher will, you know, try to be nice and say, you know, we'll talk about this later. We'll talk about this at the end of class. You know, you have to be sometimes real direct with these students. Like you beat around the bush, they're not going to pick up on what you're hinting at. But I find giving them a stick-em note that you can just say, stop, we'll talk about it at, you know, 8:53, 2 minutes before the bell rings. It allows them to set it aside because they've got that visual there as a constant reminder. If they don't have this visual here, they're going to keep bringing up whatever it is they are stuck on. Visual directions, for academics. I have a 5th grade gen ed teacher. She is the master at using this dry erase board. Any directive she gives the class, she's writing it down on the dry erase board and she gives it to the student with Cameron, the student with ASD. And one day I'm praising her up one side, down the other. She goes, "Are you kidding me?" She said, "This has made my life so much easier." She said, otherwise, she said, "I'd be over here saying 20 times to him, take out your journal, take out your journal, take out your journal." She said, "I would spend so much time over here." She said, "It's not that he doesn't have the skill." She said, "He just needed this information." She said, for as long as, in a visual format, as long as he needed to process. Same thing for the middle school, high school students. I was in a high school science class and the teacher said, "Okay, we've got 30 minutes, everyone, to study for the test we have next week." And the student was like looking around, and I said to that teacher, "Can you just put in a stick-a-note checklist manner what he needs to do right now? Focus his attention for this science test." This is just an example. One of my high school students, he and his teachers would break down his assignments, whether it was a test or an assignment, what was coming up, what he needed to do, what day, and very importantly, how long it should take him to do it. He would think to read chapter 4, he would take 4 hours to do it. And the teacher's like, "Nope, this is how long," but she would put it in a visual format. She would do this with him. This is an example of a high school student's schedule. A high school student that's in gen ed full-time. Check in with a special ed, check out. But he needed, he would never get his homework assignments written down. So the special ed teacher's calling everybody. He never got the materials home that he needed. And so the special ed teacher would load his backpack. So we created a schedule for him that had all of his classes, his gen ed classes. The second column were all things that we wanted him to work on, things that he could do, but we wanted them to generalize to these gen ed classrooms. The next 2 sections where it said assignments and materials, those were blank. And there were nice big spaces. This is where he would copy down from the board, like chemistry, first hour, what was the assignment. And then his gen ed teachers, per me having a meeting with them and asking them, would they also put not only the assignment for first hour, but draw a slash and put down what materials the students need. So I wanted Mitch, at the end of the day, to be able to load his own backpack from looking at that materials list. So this was just an example of a student schedule. You guys, these timers, you might have seen these, special ed folks use these a lot. These are they're cheap and they break easy, but they're best for teaching passing of time. Digital, and my students with ASD neurologically don't understand passing of time. They don't have a clue what 10 minutes looks like, feels like, but when you use this timer, the red chunk, when you pull the lever over to the 10, there's a red chunk appears that gradually disappears as time progresses. A lot of teachers use digital timers, and that doesn't teach, for my students, passing of time. If they have 10 minutes to do something and you use the digital timer, it's going 9:59, 9:58. You're like, what the heck do those numbers mean? Then it gets down to 2 minutes, and we're like, hurry up, your time's almost up. If they can see visually that red, getting smaller and smaller, that's giving them a better understanding of passing of time. Gen ed teachers, they have big ones of these, medium-sized, little desktop. I have some high school students that use the watches for managing passing periods. So lots of different ways to utilize it. They have apps as well. For those students that won't let go, that can't have to do things to completion, we give them a visual finish later folder. Put your spelling in here. We're going to come back to it. We have to do math now. It's like help them let go of it. And we might even put finish later work time on their schedule. High school teachers, for those long-term assignments, visually break it down for them, all right? What they need to do each week, how long it should take them. And then this is just using a visual 5-point scale. I actually see this in a lot of schools now, working on vocal volume. All right, I see this in a lot of classrooms. What's a 1, what does a 5 look like? And teachers, I'm going to wrap up here because I know we are running out of time. When it comes to talking with these students, less is more. All right, as typical speakers, if someone doesn't understand us, our natural inclination is to talk more because you think the more you talk, the more they're going to get it. With students with ASD, it has the opposite effect. The more you teach teacher, right? I have Charlie Brown here because I wondered, does it sound like Charlie Brown's teacher inside the heads of these students when we are doing so much talking? Are they just hearing wah, 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 and it's like not meaning anything to them? Keep your language simple, concrete, provide structure, routine. Too much downtime, unstructured time, you're going to see unpredictability. Reduce distractions, use their high interest. Don't take it personally, any of this, and avoid those power struggles if possible. Pick your battles. These students are puzzles, as I said at the beginning. Some of them are like 5,000-piece puzzles. I was hopeful by the end of the training, even a short 2-hour one where I've thrown so much information at you, I'm still hopeful I've created a few puzzle solvers, because that's what these students need in their lives. They need people that are going to at least look at a couple of their pieces and try to figure out how can we put these puzzle pieces together. Okay, you guys, I'm 5 minutes over. I apologize for that. Thank you for giving me some time.